Hi, I'm Chris Bradbury of the BMFA Achievement Scheme Review Committee, and you're here today to check out the latest helicopter video guidance document for the flying elements of the B certificate test. If you haven't done so already, it's worth remembering you have to have completed an A certificate before you can take the B certificate. And also, if you haven't done so already, we have a Getting Started video which has important information regarding other elements of the test. If you've done all of that and you're ready to take your B certificate, let's get going.
We're here at BMFA Buckminster to film the latest in the series of Achievement Scheme videos, namely the helicopter A and B certificates. And I've got with me today behind the camera Chris Bradbury, who's the current chairman of the Achievement Scheme Review Committee, but also very kindly doing the demonstration flying for us is Summer Fisher, and she's here today supported by her mum and her mechanic, Rachel Plant. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask Summer very shortly to run us through all the pre-flight checks on the heli before we actually run through the flying part of the test.
Hi, I'm Summer Fisher from Norfolk. I've been flying since I was about 10 years old and I'm 16 now. And I definitely think with the A and B test, when you first start flying them, it's a bit of a challenge to get through them, but they're really, really important and good for grounding when you first start flying. It really, really helped when I was flying later on because it means you can catch the heli at any angle and you're safe with the heli. Okay, so when you first get to the field, you've got to find the person in charge, ask them for the site rules, how high you can fly, any areas that you can't fly, where the pit area is, where you plug in and where you go and fly, and then also if they have a pegboard. And then once you've done that, you get your heli and do the pre-flight checks. So I'm going to start off at the head, so I'm just going to lift it up and down and pull in and out to make sure there's no play. And then I'm going to check the blade grip arms to make sure they're on securely. Then looking at the blades, I'm going to check the roots to make sure there's no chips or delamination. Going along the leading edge of the blade, not stroking it in case there's any loose carbon, you could get a splinter. And then look at the tailing edge. And if that's all fine, give it a twist to make sure it doesn't delaminate. And then what you can do is look down the blade to make sure that there's no ripples. Because if you've had a knock or anything, it could affect it in the middle, not just on the sides. So I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other blade to check the root, the leading edge, trailing edge, twist it, and then look down the blade. And that looks all good. So I'm going to check the linkages now. So I'm going to give it a little wiggle to see if there's any wearing in the ball links or the uni ball, and then I'm going to put pressure on it to make sure it doesn't come off if I just push on my finger. So I'm going to do that with all of them all the way down to the servo. Then once I'm at the servos, I'm going to make sure that the screw is in the servo arm on all three. And then I'm just going to move them gently to make sure there's no notches in them. Then I'm going to give their mounts a little wiggle to make sure they're on securely, and then move to the tail servo and do the exact same thing. So check the ball link, check the screws in, and then gently move it. And once you've done that, you can move to the tail and check this ball link, and then the ones that are near the blade grips. Then once you're here, you're going to want to pull the blade grips in and out to make sure there's no play. And then on my specific heli, it has damping in the tail. So if I rock it like this, it should move slightly, which it does. But on other helis that don't have damping, there shouldn't be any movement on the tail at all. So now I'm going to check the tail blades exactly the same as I did with the main blades. So check the root, look at the leading edge, trailing edge, twist them, and then look down them. Root, leading, trailing, twist, look down. So that's perfectly fine. Now I'm going to look at the tail overall, make sure all the screws are in, nothing's loose. If it isn't, make sure that's on securely. And then I'm going to move back here and make sure this plastic bit here is on securely. Then check the boom is on right, and then come to the tail belt. So you don't want them to be too tight, because if they're too tight then it will wear really quickly, but if it's too loose it will just slip on the gears. So I'm just going to give it a little push, so it should be kind of rubbery. And then if you have tail gears or any gears on the heli, you want to spin the rotor head round and make sure none of the gears are hooked or it's worn at all. So now I'm just going to look at the motor. So rock it side to side and forwards and backwards, make sure that's on properly, and then give it a little spin to make sure the bearing's okay. Then moving on to the speed controller, you make sure that's on securely, and you look at all the wires on it, make sure nothing's rubbed. Look inside the connectors and make sure there's no corrosion. Make sure the motor wires are okay and they're not rubbing. And then go to the back of the speed controller where there's wires plugged in. Make sure they're plugged in all the way and none of them are falling out. Then follow it down and make sure all of the wires from all of the servos and everything is alright and not rubbing. They're all plugged in properly. Then check the flybarless unit, give it a little wiggle, make sure it's on properly. Then look at the aerials coming off of the flybarless unit, make sure they're not rubbing and they're on properly. Pull them out here and make sure the top's all connected right, and make sure they're not sticking out too far so they don't get caught in anything or on the blades. And then you want to do an overall look, so I'm going to look at the OptiGuard I have on here, make sure it's plugged in. So it's basically a backup battery in case there's a failure or I run out of the big battery completely, so I can land it. I'm going to check the undercarriages on securely, give an overall look at all the screws, make sure they're okay, which it all is. So that's the pre-flight checks done. And now I'm going to unplug the motor wires and then put a battery in and see if all the directions are correct, and then do a range check.
Well, thank you, Summer. That was a really very detailed pre-flight check. What we're going to ask Summer to do now is show us both a fail-safe check and also a range check on a helicopter. And she's got Rachel in here to help her when she does the range check. And it's quite these are things that are quite important. We've had quite a few questions about both the fail-safe and the range check on our Zoom meetings, so it'll be a really good, useful demonstration to include that in the video. Okay, over to you, Summer. Thank you.
While I'm doing my range check, what I've done is I've unplugged 2 motor wires so it won't spool up at all. But if you can't reach the motor wires, you can take off the motor pinion, or failing that, take off the blades to make sure that everything's safer. And now I've got my transmitter on, so I'm going to check all the switches in the right place, my holder's on, motor switch is off, and all of my banks are in the correct position. I'm going to make sure that my transmitter battery is above at least 40%, which is at 87 right now, so that's all right. And then I'm going to turn on the heli, but if you have rates and trims, you have to make sure they're in the correct place. And with model memory on another transmitter apart from VBAR, because VBAR automatically selects it, you'll have to select the right one so you have the correct settings for your heli. So I'm just going to plug in now. Okay. So I have telemetry on my transmitter, so it tells me if I have a full battery or not. But if you don't have it, you'll have to check it with a battery checker. You can even do it as well as having the telemetry on there, so it's a backup. So what I'm going to do now is on my transmitter, go into model status and then go into antenna status. And on here, it allows me to do my range check, as well as it tells the antenna status for both the transmitter and the receiver. And if you look at it, it has to be in between good and perfect. And VBAR says that you have to take 10 paces back, 10 meters away, and make sure that everything's correct, so all the right directions. And I'm going to ask Rachel to turn around the heli and make sure it's all working perfectly. So I'm just going to take my 10 paces back. Okay, so I'm 10 paces back away from the heli, and I'm just going to move the pitch up and down so I can see that it's working. And I'm going to ask Rachel to turn it, yeah, and it's working again. So turn another 90 degrees. Correct, it's working. And then one more time, please. Okay, so that's all perfect. So while it's right there, I'm just going to check the actual directions are correct. So push left and the swash go left, right, it goes right, forwards, it goes forwards. Could you turn it sideways so I can see? Yeah. And then backwards, and then the tail's moving all right. So the range check has worked and it's all working perfectly. So now I'm going to take the blades off and then do a failsafe test. Okay, so I've replugged the motor wires back in again, and as you can see, I've taken all the blades off, so when it spools up, it doesn't actually start flying. And I'm just going to plug in, again making sure my transmitter switches are all in the right place, and do the same checks as before. Okay, and I'm going to wait for it to set. Okay, and on a Mikado transmitter, they don't actually allow you to turn off the transmitter when it's got a model set, but there is a specific part. If you go into the menu, there's transmitter setup, and then you go to BMFA failsafe test, and I'll ask you to input a random number, so I'll put that in there, so it makes sure that you're paying attention and you didn't accidentally click into it. So I'm just going to step back to a safe distance. You can ask someone to hold the heli down at the skids and the blades and say keep everything out, like all your hands are away from the moving parts, but it should be fine. So just going to click into that, and then I'll spool up.
Motor on.
And I'll turn off. And it turned off when I turned off the transmitter, so it's working perfectly. And that's how you do a failsafe test.
Before you start the B certificate test, it's important for the candidate to understand that unlike the A certificate test, the examiner now has discretion on which direction some of the manoeuvres are to be performed. This is because the test is designed to recognise the candidate's more advanced level of ability. Manoeuvre B, the bow tie, the examiner may request the candidate flies clockwise, where the first transition from the centre marker is to the right, or anti-clockwise, where the first transition from the centre marker is to the left. Manoeuvre C, the 4-point pirouette, the examiner may request the candidate rotate clockwise or anti-clockwise. Manoeuvre D, the top hat, the examiner may request the candidate fly the manoeuvre from the left to right or right to left. Manoeuvre I, the figure of 8, the examiner may request the candidate begin their initial run-in from either the left or the right. And Manoeuvre J, the double stall turn, the examiner may request the candidate to begin their initial run-in from either the left or the right. As a result, although the candidate will only be expected to perform each manoeuvre in one given direction, it is important that the candidate practices both orientations and is comfortable with performing each manoeuvre in either direction before attempting the test, as a candidate may be failed if they are unable to perform the manoeuvre in the direction requested by the examiner. Manoeuvres G and H, the rectangular circuits, may be flown in either order, either left-hand circuit first or right-hand circuit first at the discretion of the candidate, and Manoeuvre K, the 45-degree descent and landing, may be approached from either the left or the right at the choice of the candidate. It is therefore advised that the examiner and candidate take a moment to discuss these options before starting the test, so both parties are clear on what is to be expected. Now Summer is ready to fly, you'll notice she's tied her hair back for safety and to avoid distraction during flight, and the helicopter has been moved to a safe area for arming, as is the site rules.
So I've made sure that all my switches are in the correct place, and again, if you had a different transmitter, you check it's in the right model memory, the trims and rates, everything's in the correct place if you have that. And I'm just going to plug in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand just behind the heli, and I'm going to look at the leading edge of the blade, and as I put positive pitch in, the leading edge should go up, and negative it should go down, so that's all correct. Now looking at the swash, it should do left and right aileron with the stick, so when I put left, swash goes left, put right, it goes right, and then forwards and backwards elevator, forwards and backwards, which is correct. Now looking at the tail, when I put left rudder in, the leading edge of the blade faces right, but it cuts into the air that direction. So it's going to turn this way and the nose is going to go left. So that's correct. And then when I put right in, turn this way, the nose goes right. Now I'm going to check the gyro directions. So as I lift it, I look at the swash. It should go forwards when I go backwards and backwards when I go forwards, which it does, and then left when I go right and right when I go left, which is correct. And then looking down here, the leading edge of the blade should go the opposite direction to which I turn the boom, which it does. So now I'm ready to put my canopy on and then do my flight.
Throughout the flying elements of the test, Summer will assume other people are flying at all times and make relevant calls for her actions towards the runway. You'll notice Summer has Rachel as her helper here, which is perfectly acceptable. However, a candidate will be failed if the helper is seen to take over the decision-making process from the candidate at any point. The first exercise is the hovering bow tie. Starting from the takeoff and landing point, the candidate should climb to around 10 feet while simultaneously moving forwards to the centre marker, which is the start and end point for the manoeuvre. The candidate is expected to stop and hover the helicopter over the centre marker for about 5 seconds, before moving on to the next position, with the direction being at the examiner's discretion. The candidate should transition between markers, stopping for about 5 seconds at each point, following the path of a bow tie if viewed from above. The helicopter should be kept with a consistent tail-in orientation and not be adjusted to point at the pilot at the outer edges of the manoeuvre. The manoeuvre must be done at about 10 feet, so examiners should watch for a common habit where candidates hovered around 4 to 6 feet or about eye level. The helicopter should be moved in a straight line from point to point, so the candidate should be careful not to drift off that line. The examiner should make a suitable allowance for wind throughout the test, provided the candidate makes suitable corrections and is not deemed to be chasing the helicopter at any point. If a candidate does not complete a manoeuvre as required, but is deemed to be flying well, the examiner may request they redo any element of the test at their discretion, though multiple attempts at any one or more of the manoeuvres should be considered a fail. The exercise will finish once the helicopter is back over the centre marker, which enables the candidate to transition into the 4-point pirouette. The 4-point pirouette starts with a 5-second tail-in hover over the centre marker, before then rotating 90 degrees either clockwise or anti-clockwise at the request of the examiner to bring the helicopter side-on to the candidate, which is then held for about 5 seconds. The candidate will then be expected to perform 3 more 90-degree rotations in the same direction, passing through nose in and side-on in the opposite direction until back to tail in, stopping for about 5 seconds at each of the 90 degrees. The candidate is expected to keep the helicopter at a fairly consistent height and position over the centre marker throughout the exercise, though the speed they rotate each 90 degrees at is at their discretion. Some may prefer a quick snap, whereas others may find it easier to yaw slowly, giving themselves more time to balance the controls as they go. Once the final 5-second tail-in hover has been completed, the candidate should transition from the centre marker out to a point beyond the outer marker, ready to begin the top hat in the direction requested by the examiner. The transition should be completed by hovering at a walking pace. The top hat then starts with the helicopter at the hovering height of around 10 feet, positioned at the outer marker 15 metres away from the centre marker, where it has hovered for about 5 seconds. The manoeuvre requires the helicopter to then be moved across 5 more points at a walking pace, while stopping and hovering for about 5 seconds at each point. From point 2 to point 3, the helicopter should only climb vertically by about 4 metres. Then from point 4 to point 5, the helicopter should descend vertically back to the original 10-foot height for the last 2 points. The ascent and descent at these 2 stages should be smooth with minimal horizontal movement. Care and attention should be paid by the candidate at points 3 and 4, as the height of the helicopter is now such that in many cases the horizon is below the candidate's eye line. A common mistake made by many during the top hat is not to stop and hover for about 5 seconds at each of the points, especially at the first and last starting and ending points. Throughout the exercise, the helicopter should be kept side on to the candidate's flight line to maintain a constant heading. Once the candidate has completed the last 5-second hover, the helicopter can be transitioned to the centre marker for the 20-second nose-in hover. Again, the transition should be completed by hovering at a walking pace. The candidate may opt to fly around and position themselves straight into nose-in, as Summer has done here, or they may opt to position over the centre marker tail-in first and then rotate 180 degrees. Either method is perfectly acceptable, however the 20-second count should not start until the helicopter is in a stable nose-in hover over the centre marker. During the 20 seconds, the helicopter's height and position should be fairly consistent as demonstrated in this video. At the end of the 20-second nose-in hover, the helicopter may be returned to tail-in and brought back to land at the takeoff and landing point. The candidate may choose to spool the helicopter down or keep the model in idle up ready for the circuit manoeuvres. This landing is also a suitable opportunity to refuel or switch main flight batteries if required, but this must be agreed before starting the test. The first circuit exercise is to take off, check the airspace is clear, and then climb to a height and perform a left-hand circuit. You'll notice in this video that Summer actually starts with a right-hand circuit. This is absolutely fine, as the left-hand circuit and right-hand circuit may be performed in either order at the choice of the candidate. The key things to note are that the helicopter should now be flying at a circuit height, which might vary between candidates but should be somewhere between 30 to 80 feet, or roughly 1 to 2 houses high. The candidate must not fly an oval circuit or stop and perform a pirouette at each corner. The circuit must be rectangular and flown at a constant suitable flying speed, so each corner will need to be a positively controlled banked turn. Although the method a candidate uses to move between the circuit exercises is not scored as part of the test, it can be used as a very good indicator for a candidate that is better prepared. In this video, Summer uses procedural turns to give herself plenty of room to safely turn, as well as time to think before going into her next manoeuvre. The examiner should pay attention to the amount of rudder control used by the candidate in the bank turns, as the helicopter may appear to drop its tail in a corner if not enough rudder is used, or alternatively, it may appear to lift its tail if too much is used. The correct amount of rudder will see the helicopter remain fairly horizontal, as Summer is demonstrating here. Both circuits should be flown at a similar speed and height and measure approximately the same size, with the longest leg being at least 50 metres. It is important to note that the initial turn on each circuit is made away from the flight line and the model must never pass behind the candidate. The figure of 8 should start from the direction chosen by the examiner. The candidate should start the first turn before they reach themselves to ensure the centre crossover point is directly ahead of them. Mistiming this starting point often leads to odd-sized loops, as well as misaligning the centre crossover point where the helicopter needs to be directly in front of the candidate and flying exactly away from themselves. The figure of 8 must consist of 2 equally sized loops, flown as a continuous banked circuit by making constant adjustments to the bank angle and pitch to compensate for the wind, and again the rudder should be controlled to avoid dropping or lifting of the tail. The figure of 8 finishes as the candidate completes the second 3/4 loop and flies past themselves. The next exercise is the double stall turn, where the candidate does a stall turn at either end of the circuit back to back, starting at the end requested by the examiner. The stall turns should be of a consistent speed and both reach roughly the same height. The helicopter should be pulled back to vertical, with the 180-degree turn away from the flight line being done at the peak of each climb. The helicopter should then descend back down roughly the same line it climbed with little deviation. The last exercise is 45-degree side-on descent and landing from a minimum of 50 feet, which can be done either from the left or the right at the candidate's choice. The manoeuvre does not need to be started from full circuit speed and may be started from a static hover or as Summer demonstrates here, by turning into the chosen circuit direction at a smooth hovering speed. The helicopter should be brought down smoothly and landed side on within 1 metre of the takeoff and landing point, though a few seconds pause can be taken to align the landing before touching down. The model can now be spooled down and made safe, as this concludes the flying elements of the test.
So if there was anyone flying, I would look left and right to make sure that there's nobody going over the top of me. And when I pick up the heli, the blades are completely stopped and I don't put my hands anywhere near when it's moving. And then I'm just going to unplug here.
Again, to comply with local site rules for the type of helicopter, the model's main flight battery is disconnected for safety before returning to the pits area. Thank you, Duncan, and a special thank you to Summer for the amazing demonstrations throughout this video. You might think that we've just glossed over the post-flight checks, but the post-flight checks are the same as the pre-flight checks. So if you want to have another look at that section at any point, just rewind this video and have a little watch. The last part of your test now will be general knowledge questions and mandatory quiz questions. We often get asked where these general knowledge questions come from, and it could be anything from site or club specific rules, to individual questions about the type of aircraft you're flying, to anything from the BMFA Members Handbook. Now when we say anything from the BMFA Members Handbook, we obviously don't expect you to answer questions about the BMFA Constitution, just anything to do with the safe and lawful flying of model aircraft. The mandatory questions are currently available on the BMFA Achievement Scheme website, which is achievements.bmfa.uk. And those questions have literally just been updated at the beginning of 2021 as we finish this video, to reflect changes in the Air Navigation Order laws and regulations from the UK Civil Aviation Authority. Also on that website you will find more videos such as this. You will find downloadable copies of most of the guidance documents for the various different tests, as well as the BMFA Members Handbook. If you want to search Facebook, you'll find various different BMFA groups, including the BMFA Achievement Scheme, and on there you'll find where we list events that you can attend for taking advice and getting help from people. So that website again is achievements.bmfa.uk, or you can go to Facebook and search for BMFA Achievements. So if you are considering a test, one of the best resources you could then talk to is your local examiner, whether that's a club examiner or an area chief examiner. Either way, we're all here to help. We want to get you through the tests and help you pass. We're not going to try and trick you up. We'll happily demonstrate flying elements. We'll talk through theory and explain mandatory questions and general knowledge. We could also take you for a full mock test so you understand exactly what's to be expected before then taking a real test. So all that remains to be said now is remember to fly safely, have fun, and most importantly, best of luck.